All right, quick discussion on culture. I saw that a lot of you have already answered the discussion board on culture. I always enjoy learning about the different cultures that my students have grown up in. Okay, so quick overview. What is culture? Culture is basically a pattern of shared meaning and behavior among a group of people passed from one generation to the next. So it's basically the stuff that your grandparents did, very important to them. They pass it down. You will probably pass it down to your kids. In my family, my mom is Jewish, and so even though she was not, and we were never religious Jews, we still would talk about and celebrate some of the different holidays like Passover and Hanukkah. That is part of the culture that my mom grew up in that she passed down to us. Cultural intelligence is the ability and the willingness to apply cultural awareness to practical uses. So that basically just means being aware of and sensitive to other people from other cultures. We can use cultural awareness, especially like in diplomacy between nations, helping immigrants assimilate to a new society. So that one's kind of fun because they're bringing their old culture with them into a new to them culture and basically combining the two and creating a brand new culture, right, that they will pass down to their kids. We can use cultural intelligence in understanding international news better. So why are they doing things so differently in this country versus ours? Making friends who are culturally different, etc. What are the aspects of culture? It is versatile, so we would use different parts in different situations. If I'm traveling, I'm an American. If I'm traveling overseas, if I'm traveling in a different state, I'm a Virginian. Maybe I'm English speaking, or I speak French, etc. So I'd use different aspects when I needed them, right? Culture is shared. It's a concept that exists between people. It's a flexible system of guidelines of how we behave and how we expect others to behave. It helps us to interpret the world around us. Cumulative, it builds across generations. We all add our little bits to it, and it keeps building. Patterns, there are patterns in culture. Culture is not fixed. Again, it keeps building. It's guidelines and norms that suggest to us or let us know how to think, feel, and behave. Sometimes we follow culture and sometimes we like to buck against it a little bit. 3 common ways to think about culture, just quickly if you want to look at this one. Progressive cultivation. That's basically it's kind of where countries can come into trouble. If you think about India, the caste system, that is what you would think about with progressive cultivation, or back a couple hundred years ago when we had the aristocracy and then the very, very poor people. As a way of life, this is the most common way of understanding cultural preferences: food, dress, religion, organizational culture, etc. Lastly, there is shared learning. This one's probably the least obvious, but the most psychological approach to thinking about culture. Culture is learned, includes many invisible concepts, such as the norms for feeling, expressing emotion. So if you grew up in Real Men Don't Cry, that's part of the culture that you grew up in. Formal rules for language use, sense of identity, values, some beliefs, among other things. We can study different cultures. There are a couple different ways. So first, ethnographic study or cultural psychology is an approach to researching culture. It emphasizes an inside approach, so we don't bring all our tools and everything and try to understand it through our American lens. Basically, we rely on interviews, observation, and the cultural member's own language to define and explain important concepts and behaviors. Cross-cultural psychology, in contrast, is an approach to researching culture. It emphasizes the use of standard measurements and scales. One big benefit to that, it allows for easier comparison between cultures. And the end of our book, actually, you will read about an ethnographic study done on alcohol, but that is a good example of an ethnographic study. The researchers went and immersed themselves in the country, and then after a year came home to kind of review and go through everything that they had learned. All right, the self and culture, individualism versus collectivism. You probably learned a lot about this in Psych 201, individualistic countries, which America is basically. It is, our worlds revolve around us, ourselves, our achievement, what we want, what we need. Collectivist countries, they revolve more around the group, the family. We do what's best for the group rather than what is best for the self. Neither is right or wrong. They both have benefits. Individualistic cultures consider the individual the basic unit of measurement. Individuals are considered to be unique. These societies kind of highlight that we celebrate the diversity that comes with uniqueness. Individuals, we're expected to pursue our own goals. We are capable of creating our own happiness. We take charge of what happens to us. We are free to express our own opinions, take credit for our own successes, sometimes take credit for the success of others. Examples of these cultures include the US, Canada, Australia, and Germany. Collectivist cultures consider the group to be the basic unit of measurement, so everything that they do is for the good of the group. They work towards group harmony and collective well-being. What's good for one is not good for all. The cultural task of the individual within a group is some responsibilities to preserve group harmony. Individuals put aside their own personal goals. They are more likely to express humility, defer to authority, and to withhold their own opinions, and go along with the opinion of the majority. Examples of these cultures are South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. The independent self and the interdependent self are both self-construals. That is, they are ways that people define themselves. We see this in both individualistic and collectivistic cultures. People with an independent orientation are likely to see themselves as a collection of stable traits. These traits guide their decisions and their behavior. People with an interdependent orientation, so they rely more on others, are likely to see themselves as a collection of fluid relationships. That means the relationship that affects them at one time will be different from the relationship that will affect them at another time. Fluid relationships, and it is the situations they find themselves in that guide their decisions and their behavior. All right. Closing here. Culture is learned. Culture really helps us shape our identity, our emotions, what is socially acceptable within our culture, our etiquette, how we act, and our values and morals. So a lot of our values and morals, what we think is right or wrong, is learned through our culture. Quickly, cultural relativism. It is the principled objection to passing overly culture-bound, ethnocentric judgments on aspects of other cultures. So it's basically ethnocentric bias or ethnocentrism is the belief that the culture you have grown up in is right and that the behaviors in other cultures are wrong just because they're different. A value judgment is an assessment based on our own preferences and priorities about the basic goodness or badness of a concept or practice. So that is one thing that you really want to watch out for. Cultures are different. They're certainly not bad or wrong. All right, that is the very end of our discussion on culture.